Hello friends, I'm glad you came to my channel. I would really appreciate your support in helping me reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. Let's get to the story. It all started with a harmless habit, watching adult content on my phone. But soon, the habit got out of control and became a daily reality that I couldn't get rid of. I even found myself sneaking into the living room for a few minutes, thinking no one would notice and watching there. I considered myself discreet, but apparently my stepmother Linda was paying attention. She was well into her 60s, but age had not diminished her self-confidence. Gradually, her behavior began to change. The way she dressed, the way she moved around the house. She began to wear looser clothes, then more revealing outfits until it was impossible not to notice. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, but the signs were there, and they were intentional. Linda was leaning too far back in the kitchen or sitting down in a way that left nothing to the imagination. I could feel the tension hanging between us, thick and unmistakable. Doubt swirled in my head. Was she teasing me, or was my obsession distorting my perception? But one afternoon, there was no room for ambiguity. She walked outside in a sheer white skirt that clung to her, leaving nothing unnoticed. I tried to ignore it, keeping my gaze on the phone in my hands, but when I looked up, I saw her bend under the table, ostensibly looking for something, but there was nothing there. My pulse quickened, and she turned, catching my gaze. "Why are you so surprised?" she asked with a knowing smile on her lips. My mouth went dry. "I think you like these things," she said in a low voice, keeping her eyes on me. "They've been on your phone for a while now." I stammered, my heart pounding. "But you're my stepmom." She stepped closer, her smile growing wider. "You know, a lot of people would like to be in your shoes," she said, a challenge in her voice. "In what shoes?" I managed to whisper. She leaned toward me, her blouse hanging low enough for me to see everything. "In these," she murmured. She reached for the zipper on my jeans. "Let's play a game," she said, sitting on my lap, her eyes looking at me defiantly. "Let's see how long you can stare without moving." That was a test I failed almost immediately. I pulled her to me, and what followed was inevitable, a secret that soon turned into a habit and was repeated whenever my father wasn't home. The 40-year age difference between us was unreal, but when we were alone together, Linda seemed to shed those years, transforming into someone younger and more energetic. I never envisioned myself in a relationship with someone much older, much less my stepmother. The age difference loomed over us, a constant reminder of how unnatural it was. But no matter what, there was something intoxicating about a relationship with Linda. She offered a depth and perspective that girls my age couldn't match. There was excitement in the secrets, in the stolen moments, in the looks that carried unspoken promises. But the excitement wasn't enough to sustain us forever. Eventually, the truth came out. Our differences, which were so easy to dismiss at first, began to widen, and the chasm between us grew. We had nothing in common when it came to everyday life. Music, movies, even our views of the world. Linda often talked about the past, the 80s and 90s, and her stories seemed to me like echoes of a distant time that I could only see from old photos and movies. Sometimes she would talk about her youth with such vivid nostalgia that I was fascinated, even though I couldn't quite relate to her. It was like stories from another world, colorful but faded, forever inaccessible to me. There were times we tried to bridge the gap. She would introduce me to her favorite old songs, and I would try to explain new technologies and trends to her. We laughed about our differences, but underneath that laughter was an unspoken realization that those differences were not trivial. They made up our lives and shaped us in ways that were not always compatible. The fear of what others might think weighed heavily on me. The thought of revealing our relationship to family or friends terrified me. Linda was almost as old as my grandmother. I knew people would gossip, and I hated the thought of being the object of their whispers. Every time I looked at her, I was torn between desire and the realization that it wasn't going to work out. I imagined the judgmental looks, the whispers behind our backs, and it filled me with a sense of impending doom. I couldn't bear the thought of my father finding out, or my friends losing respect for me. It was a constant struggle, a fear that collided with the awe of what we shared. Despite the difficulties, There were moments of genuine connection. Linda possessed a wisdom that no one else I knew had. She knew how to take care of me, not only physically, but emotionally as well. She understood my fears and insecurities in a way no one else did. She listened to me talk about my dreams, anxieties, frustrations, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Life with her was strange, confusing, and exciting. She was both a lover and a mentor, and sometimes I felt like I learned more from her than from anyone else in my life. There were evenings when we sat together, talking about everything and nothing. She would tell me stories about her past, crushes, adventures, mistakes she had made, and lessons she had learned. I was fascinated by her honesty and the frankness of her experiences. She was an open book, and the more I learned about her, the more I realized how different our worlds were. But that only brought us closer together. Deep down, I knew it couldn't last, but I wasn't ready to let her go. Soon, my friends began to notice that something was wrong with me. I became secretive, lying about my whereabouts, distancing myself from them. Jake, one of my closest friends, was the first to reach out to me. "You're acting weird. What's going on?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. I tried to brush it off, but eventually the truth came out. Linda, the mystery, the excitement, the confusion. Jake was stunned. "Wait, Linda? Your stepmother? She's 40 years older than you," he said with disbelief in his voice. "You realize how crazy that sounds, right?" I nodded, feeling both defensive and ashamed at the same time, but I couldn't deny my feelings. "I know it's not supposed to be like this," I admitted, "but we're together now. I care about her." Jake shook his head. "You need to think about what this means for your future. She's 60 and you're 20. What happens when you're 40 and she's 80? What will happen to your family?" His words hurt me because they echoed my own fears, but I couldn't let go of Linda. I was in too deep. The bond we shared seemed too real for me to just give up. My friends tried to reason with me, but I was lost in the moment, in the rush of what we had. I knew it was dangerous, possibly doomed, but I wasn't ready to give it up. Maybe I was naive, maybe reckless, but I believed, however briefly, that love could overcome anything, even the impossible. Jake wasn't the only one who noticed. As time went on, more and more of my friends began to question my behavior. They sensed that I was distracted, that I was hiding something from them. It became harder and harder to come up with excuses for why I couldn't hang out or why I looked so preoccupied. Eventually, some of them came face to face with me, and I could see the worry in their eyes. "You haven't been yourself lately," my friend Sarah said one afternoon. "You keep going off somewhere and never tell us what's going on. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, not knowing how much to say. I didn't feel like lying, but I also wasn't ready to tell the truth. "I just have a lot on my mind," I said, trying to brush it off. Sarah didn't look convinced. "We're worried about you. You know you can talk to us, right?" I nodded, but the words felt hollow. I knew they wouldn't understand, and how could they understand? The situation was so far from what they could have imagined. I was dating my stepmother, a woman who was 40 years older than me. It sounded absurd, even to me. But despite the absurdity, I couldn't deny how I felt about Linda. There were moments when I doubted everything. When Linda and I were alone together, everything was right. But once I was away from her, doubts crept into my soul. Am I throwing my life away for a relationship that has no future? Am I sacrificing friendships, family, my own sense of stability for something that could never last? These questions haunted me, but the answers were never found. Linda, for her part, seemed to understand my inner turmoil. She never pressed me, never asked for more than I could give. She seemed content with what we had, even if it was fleeting. "We don't need to define it," she told me one night as we lay in bed. "We can just enjoy it while it lasts." Her words were meant to reassure me, but they also made me realize how temporary everything was. We were living in a bubble, cut off from the rest of the world, and sooner or later, that bubble would burst. I knew it, and so did she. But for now, we were both willing to pretend that it could last forever. As the weeks turned into months, the pressure began to build. My friends became more insistent. My father began to ask questions, and even Linda seemed to sense that our time was running out. The thrill of secrecy was fading, replaced by the cold reality of what we were doing. The age difference, the family ties, the inevitable judgment, all loomed over us like a dark cloud. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Linda turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. I hesitated, not knowing how to answer. Was I happy? In the moments we were together, yes, I was. But outside of those moments, I was overcome with doubts and fears. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think you do, but it's so complicated," she said, nodding, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I know. I feel it too." We sat in silence for a long time, the gravity of the situation weighing on us. I realized that it couldn't go on like this forever. Eventually, something had to change. But for now, we had each other, and that was enough. Maybe I was naive, maybe reckless, but I believed, however briefly, that love could overcome anything, even the impossible.